I've often suggested that reality follows consciousness, not the obverse. You may well have written me off as having lost touch with reality. By definition, I have. But physicists are also increasingly questioning if there really is a universe, and thus reality. At the heart of this questioning is the important question: how do we know this is real? Neuroscience tells us that what we perceive is hallucination, making sense of the information seemingly stimulating our senses. For example, there is no scientific basis for colour. It's simply something we find useful to explain information coming to our eyes. But it goes much further than this, and that it is information appears to be constructed internally, rather than the external reality we assume it to be. That is, we construct the very information which seems to form our reality. Again, this has resonance with my view that the paranormal does not describe the actions of external entities, but our own thought patterns. So maybe the universe we believe to be made of matter is simply the interface, a device which allows us to comprehend the unfathomable patterns of what reality actually is. The haze of probabilities and possibilities hinted at by quantum physics. The inference of the double slit experiment. Taking the double slit experiment, what is real? The particle, the pattern, the measurement? Our choice to observe. Perhaps what is more interesting is that the maths of the theoretical physics from this experiment works incredibly well. But again, what is real? The observation, the maths, the theory, the interpretation. Moving back to the universe, it seems to be more of a question than an answer. Just on certain processes which ultimately cannot be measured. The universe isn't stuff, but information we choose to explore. Could it be that the universe isn't 3D or 4D, but a 2D holographic surface? Strangely, this is exactly what the information appears to be telling us. A black hole seems to be defined by the information contained on its surface, and not within it. Even the universe seems to be the projection of the information on its surface, or boundaries. Applied to what we call reality, could it be that everything we sense is an emergent display from information stored on the holographic boundary, which tricks us into seeing depth? But space isn't fundamental. If it isn't fundamental, then distance is meaningless. Location isn't real. Everything we think is solid is just a shadow of the information. Reality, thus, is just a reflection of the question we ask and the answers we receive. The real question isn't what is the universe made of, but where is this information stored? Apart from seeing it at the boundaries, we really don't know. If the universe itself is just code, then even the universe itself is just a projection. Thus, even questioning where the information is stored is the wrong question, because there is no location. Space-time itself is not fundamental, but a low-level image of something else. The universe is more about connections and networks than objects with properties. Everything is defined in relation to something else. There's no logical reason why there should be an arrow of time, as this would make it the only variable which is unidirectional. So time is just another simplification of a deeper pattern and entanglements. That time is emergent. Again, this has incredible resonance with my belief that the temporal is a man-made construct. From an Islamic perspective, the temporal is what keeps us from comprehending Allah's cosmos, and thus Allah himself. meaning that the very assumptions of our science are the source of evil. Ridiculous though this sounds, our science is based on what we sense. Believing the cosmos to be capable of comprehension by our senses is a supreme arrogance. Indeed, it's a reflection of our ego that it is the ego which keeps us apart from Allah. It is as though the Enlightenment is atomizing and venerating the individual, was more a triumph of narcissism than of logic. Just maybe you can begin to comprehend my distrust of the Enlightenment. So the universe is simply information. Thus things we call particles are simply ripples within energy fields. The mathematics is so consistent that it would seem that everything is determined by rules, but that every possibility is preserved. The randomness is only a reflection of the observation from within and not above. Things are temporary energy patterns with no hard boundaries between them. Fields are inherently uncertain, with even the vacuum containing these ripples, and thus is not what we believe it to be. The universe is not a machine running equations, but the equations themselves. Equations don't define reality, but are reality. There is no need for the computer, simply the rules. Perhaps gravity is simply the curvature of space and not a force, just maybe another emergent behaviour. Solidity is a large-scale effect, not matter colliding with matter, but resistance between two fields. But there is no this or that electron, only instances of the same underlying vibration. What we see as objects also being a human construct, the brain making sense of ripples and vibrations. Remember how everything is defined by its relation to something else. Does this not mean that we're in some strange way connected? That nothing exists alone? Particles become entangled irrespective of the distance, seemingly with information travelling faster than the speed of light. Space is what happens when enough things are entangled in the correct way. Maybe things are connected through some form of quantum wormholes. Again, this has great resonance with my religious conviction that Allah's creation is one. Thus we are part of the universal soul, including what we perceive as the universe, once more in sharp contradiction to the assumptions of the Enlightenment. There is no out there, only in here. As space-time is just an illusion, we have convinced ourselves exists. Space is the relationship between us and the rest of Allah's creation. Strangely, scientific experimentation seems to confirm these observations. But then there is so much which seemingly contradictory, as though we are not simply measuring the wrong things, but asking the wrong questions. There is nothing solid, only patterns. But what of the observer, of us? At what point do things become real, known as the Heisenberg cut? Experimentation suggests that it's wherever we choose it to be. And yet again, the observer is influencing the collapse of the wave function. This suggests that conscious reality doesn't simply observe the universe, but creates it. The creation exists at the interface of the observer and the observed, or co-creation. Again, you've heard me speak of co-creation before. I mean it to be how Allah requires our thinking, even speaking, as I suggested in my last vlog, to continue with the creation process. But if the observed is Allah's creation, then maybe we're talking of the same thing. Observation doesn't simply observe the information, but writes the information. Thus consciousness itself is fundamental. It's as though the very thing we dismiss as being not important is precisely the most important. If the universe is actually information, then the fundamental nature of consciousness makes perfect sense. Thus reality is not a thing but a process, a series of equations which keep writing themselves. But what is consciousness? Does it require the self to be valid? Well, increasingly biologists are questioning the very concept we have the body and its functions. Experience simply doesn't fit the traditional atomization of parts of the body. The universe is simply a series of experiences. That experience isn't a product of the universe, but the universe is a product of experience. The self becomes a boundary between what is experienced directly and what can be observed. When we perceive something, we create meaning, choosing a point on a possibility curve. Thus, we are an observer within the universe, but a localized processor of information. Even the self is not a fixed entity, but defined by its relationships. Hence, reality is relational, arising from our interactions with it. This also means there is no single shared universe, but a series of observations. Again, this is something I've hinted at before, that our reality is not necessarily the same as another's. So should we not ask why we're here, but what are we doing to create it? If there has never been a there in terms of the universe, why does this not explain why structure becomes context as we get close to the boundaries? If everything is a series of relationships, what we call the universe is useful in describing certain phenomena. It's not a thing in itself, but a process from no state to something observable, always looking this way from the inside. But there's no global reality, simply interacting perspectives, each perspective explaining its local reality. This would include notions of the matrix, the holographic universe, etc. Simply perspectives which make sense to some. I might indeed add science and the Enlightenment here. Those of you who are critical of me might want to add Islam to that. And indeed, herein lies the rationale. Herein lies the reason why one person is so sure of knowledge that others believe to be unreal. Reality is thus self-coherent, but not self-explanatory. We exist as a part of a pattern, not inside nor outside. Thus we have a vital part in the unfolding of the universe or co-creation. Instead of asking, why do I exist, we should be asking, why would I stop existing? If this is true, then consciousness or the soul continues beyond the grave. I hope you've followed me so far, but now it gets really spooky. In order to explain the next concept, I'll return to colour. Colour is not an inherent property of matter, if indeed there is matter. Colour perception is related to an object's light absorption, emission, reflection and transmission. Or is it? But we know that perceptions vary from region to region, and that a single colour may have different, even contrasting meanings around the world. Our ability to see a colour is limited by the words we have to describe it. Different languages break colour up in different ways. For example, some languages only have 4 basic words for colour, whereas others have 11 or 12. But the way in which cultures carve up the colour spectrum is somewhat arbitrary. I mention this by way of illustrating how our reality is affected by things like language. But it also suggests that it would be possible for elites, governments, etc., to influence our perceptions of reality. I tend to shun sea theories, but there's plenty of evidence of business and governments influencing what we see as reality. How else could we describe propaganda and advertising? Indeed, the health crisis was a major example of other governments deliberately deceive their populations. Where this argument does begin to sound like a sea theory is when we add the concept of consciousness creates our reality. Are the attempts by business and governments to influence our consciousness so that we create a different reality? Simply planting ideas into our consciousness could be enough to create fundamental change. For example, the far right in the UK has been suggesting that the UK is on the brink of revolution. Could this be a self-fulfilling prophecy? Taken to its logical conclusion, we might see that all that we believe to be reality is being created by us, but as a result of massive manipulation by government and elites. Yes, our own thoughts are our own, but they're implanted and manipulated by the powerful. We're back to the realm of the Matrix, and I do not wish to take this too far. You're quite capable of filling in your own blanks. The evangelical right believe that black magicians can only harm us if we've given them our express consent to do so. This has strong parallels with getting us to create our own reality. But take care, as the thrust of the science that I have outlined is that nothing is real. Is it possible that government and the elite have been automating our creation of reality? Well, isn't that precisely what AI is doing? The large-scale language models we call AI actually only use regression to respond to our conversation in a way that convincing us that they actually understand the conversation and possess intelligence. But this engages and encourages us to create a reality based on these conversations. If AI were actually neutral, maybe this wouldn't matter. But we know that there exist parameters within which AI works. We're told that this is for our own safety, such as child protection. But this also incorporates the worldview of the owners of the technology. Thus, AI is either accidentally or deliberately being employed to construct a reality in the image of the owners of the technology. Your enemy, aren't you? A small group of psychopaths and narcissists are manipulating our very act of co-creation. And it is this that so worries people unaffected by such thinking, whom we call primitive tribes, and especially that Jamin. For them it's so obvious, but we're so manipulated. For us, these thoughts are radical and difficult to comprehend. Just maybe this automation could be taken a stage further. If a quantum computer calculates every possible outcome before arriving at the most likely, could this be the actual process of creation? If so, what is the need for human consciousness? We literally can be replaced by machines.